Greetings, everyone. This is Professor Theo. This is Tuesday, a few days after Thanksgiving break. Still recovering, still stuffed from eating all the leftover goodies. Hope you all had a great time fellowshipping with family and friends. We have 2 more weeks left of classes, so I encourage you all to finish up strong. I just want to shoot this video, giving some of my thoughts and sharing some of your thoughts also on forum discussion number 5. The question was, with much emphasis now being placed on cultural diversity in the workplace, why is it then that there is still significant inequalities in the workplace? Cite some possible reasons. So this question is looking at two things. Number one, it deals with the fact that there has been a trend far as a emphasis on organizations becoming more diverse. We see this in institutions, we see this in companies, we see this in churches. So those who are in leadership are becoming more aware that it would be great business for them to diversify. And there are laws and policies being implemented that encourage and sometimes even mandate some of this diversity. And yet, there still is a lack of diversity in a lot of places. Why is that? And so you all chimed in some great stuff, so I want to go through some of what you said. One person says creating a new culture is a hard thing to do. They go on to say for years, white males dominated the corporate ladders of the United States, and in fact still do. So with this and then someone else, different person chimes in, let's be real, this is a white man's world, and he will get the job before a man of any other race will, or a woman will in many circumstances. So let's deal with that particular frame of thought that due to our history, due to the ways things were in the beginning and how they are sometimes, even when we try to institute new rules, new policies, a change of heart, a new direction, sometimes it's very difficult to establish a new culture when there's a dominant culture that has been established and thriving for such a long time. And we see this in all types of areas, whether we're talking about diversity or whether we're just talking about any type of change. Think about a church, and you come in and there's a particular culture that's existed in the church, and the new pastor wants to do some new things. There's resistance to change. Change is scary. Change is uncomfortable. Sometimes we rather stay with the comfortable thing, even if we don't even think it's the best thing for us. We rather trust that than trust this unknown thing that may be great. So that comfort level, that familiarity, that this is the way things have always been, that does play a major role. Someone says another issue is communication style and understanding. This person goes on to say that maybe they may say something that is perfectly clear and understandable to them, or understood by one group, but it's not clear and understood by another group. And so part of the ability for companies and organizations and institutions and churches to be successful is to make sure that everyone's on the same page, that we're communicating in a way that everyone gets it. So maybe some of the inequality, some of the lack of diversity, some of the tension may be caused by communicating in such a way that it appeals to one particular culture, but it may be foreign to another culture. And in our minds, that we're saying, why don't you get it? I clearly articulated the purpose. I clearly articulated the rules, the regulations, the instructions, my desires for this company. Why aren't you getting it? Well, maybe there's a disconnect culturally speaking. And maybe part of what we need to do in leadership is to make sure we're communicating in such a way that we appeal to many individuals. We think about listening and how we interpret what we hear based upon our own culture, our own frame of reference. So I can assume that when I say certain things, or if I have certain values and certain beliefs and certain attitudes that those resonate with you. So maybe we're not too far off, but there's a disconnect, there's something being lost in the translation, and we need to do a better job as far as communication. Someone says much of what we do on a daily basis is unconscious. So we have these unconscious biases that and this person says it makes it more likely for us to make rash decisions. So maybe if we have 3 months to think something through, to come up with a plan, maybe as an organization we can come up with a plan that ends up with the organization having the most diverse employees ever. Yet, if someone says you got 2 days to hire someone, all of a sudden now your base instincts, your gut reactions, you tend to gravitate towards those things that you know, towards those things that you're familiar with. And so in those instances, you're going to hire someone that you believes is like you, who is similar in nature to you. And so sometimes because of outside pressures, sometimes because of time constraints, sometimes because of fatigue, we settle or we go with the thing that sits well with us. Whether it's the best for the company or not, what would be more comfortable for me. And in those situations, we normally choose those who look like us, who talk like us, who share similar things. And that may be great to a certain extent because you want to hire like-minded people who are focused and have the same desires, same goals, but you can still have those core things exist, but have some diverse attitudes, some diverse beliefs, some different perspectives on things. And I think there's a richness in that also. Someone says that one of the major issues is that when it comes to misdiagnosing diversity, which is what the book spoke about, it occurs when the organization does not include enough people from a particular culture groups when they're trying to diagnose this issue. And I think this is very important. Whenever you get an organization who begins to have conversations about diversity, yet if those conversations are taking place among people who aren't diverse, then even the conversation about diversity is going to be lacking in diversity. You're going to be getting the same or similar perspectives based upon frame of reference. And so I think any company, any organization that is striving to generally move towards becoming more diverse, whenever you put together the committee or the panel or the think tank to try to figure out what should be the next steps, you need to model what you're trying to eventually achieve. So if you want to be more diverse, you need to model that with this committee. Because all of a sudden now you're hearing from a diverse group of people what you should be doing in terms of diversity. But if you're hearing from the same type of person and they're giving you answers to address a problem that is revolving around a lack of diversity, you can't have a committee that lacks diversity tell you about a lack of diversity. You're only getting one side of that story. This person also says that misdiagnosing the problem may lead to solutions that may not be the right solutions. I was talking about this at a leadership meeting at our church just last night. And I was saying that we need to get on the same page about the seriousness of some of the issues we have at the church. And I gave this analogy. If you are going to battle, and the pending war is tomorrow, and say, for the sake of giving each member of your army the opportunity to choose their own weapons, you say, come tomorrow to the battle and bring your weapon of choice. And some people show up, they got slingshots, some people have a little cap gun. Then the other extreme is someone brought a nuclear warhead and tanks and missiles. and all the weapons in between. And you're like, well, we're all fighting the same battle, but we got this extreme continuum of weapons. This person chose something deadly and that could blow up whole cities. This person just brought a little slingshot. Why the discrepancy? Why the And then you find out that everyone brought the weapon that they thought was most appropriate to fight the battle based upon how formidable they thought the enemy was. So if some think that the enemy isn't that tough, they bring a slingshot. If some think the enemy is one of the greatest armies ever, they bring the nuclear warhead. And then you realize, okay, we need to get on the same page about what battle we're fighting and who we're fighting against. We need to get on the same page about how serious this problem is, because we're applying solutions based upon how we view that problem. So if you misdiagnose the problem and you don't have enough diverse voices to get on the same page about how serious the problem of lack of diversity is, when you go to apply those solutions, oftentimes you're going to apply solutions that are inadequate, ineffective. They may not even truly apply to this issue. So that's going to be very important. Someone talked about gender inequity when it comes to pay. This is a major thing, especially when you're talking about in fields and in companies in areas where there's no need to say, well, a man can do this and a woman can't do this. So we're talking about normal intellectual type jobs. We're not talking about necessarily who can lift 100 pounds versus 250 pounds. We're talking about normal intellectual style jobs or skill jobs that everyone has every opportunity to build those skills to do. Even in those situations, you see an inequity when it comes to wages. How do we address that? How do we begin to close that gap? That's very important. And one of the steps we need to take is first acknowledging that gap exists. We can't simply say, well, compared to 10 years ago, look at how many women CEOs there are. Oh, that's great. Compared to 5 years ago, look at well, that's great. But when you compare it to your contemporaries, you still see that there's a gap. So you can't say, well, women were down here, but now we should just be pleased that women are now up here. Although we should be pleased with that increase, if women were down here and men were here, but now women are here, but now men are here, both are growing, but there's still that gender inequity that needs to be addressed. Someone talked about organizational climate is the way and how important the environment is. The way you view the environment at your workplace will impact minorities. So if you are a minority and you feel that you're in a workplace that is not welcoming, you're not totally valued, that's going to eventually impact your ability to work, your production, your motivation. And all of a sudden, your lack of production, all of a sudden now gives credence to why you shouldn't be getting paid as much or why you should get fired. So it almost becomes like a cycle, a vicious cycle. Like you worked hard and you were working harder than everyone else, but you kept hitting this wall that you perceive is based upon either your race or your gender. And now, over time, you begin to give less and less of yourself as far as effort and things of that nature. And all of a sudden, now that validates why you're down here, why you're not being paid equally. And so it's a slippery slope and a trick. It's a trap that we got to avoid to make sure we don't fall into. A few more things. Someone says when a company's culture is new to adopting diverse hiring practices and talent acquisition, there can be issues of consistency across the corporation. And what this person was saying is, if you've been used to doing it one way, And now you figure out we need to start doing it this other way where we really increase our diversity. More than likely, the company's lack of diversity didn't take place overnight. So the company becoming more diverse isn't going to take place overnight. It's going to be that consistency over time. And unfortunately, when we're trying to go countercultural to what we've been used to doing, when in doubt, we have a default. When someone's not holding our feet to the fire, when we're not being held accountable on a daily basis, we have a default. And this is just in life in general. Think about someone who's trying to turn over a new leaf with exercise or with diet or spiritual growth. If we don't have someone who can hold us accountable to those things, we'll slowly begin to default and backslide and shrink back and go back to what we're used to. And so there needs to be mechanisms in place when companies do try to go down this new path to hold them accountable, to have benchmarks to see how are we doing in these areas to make sure we're not sliding back into those same ruts that we were in before. Someone also talked about, gave an example of someone who perpetuated some of this inequality. This was a manager who hired a lot of her family friends. Most of them were women also. And so this nepotism, favoritism. So what's interesting about this particular thing, and it does happen a lot, we have discussions about affirmative action. And oftentimes we think of affirmative action as solely benefiting individuals who are unqualified and they get jobs, whether it's minorities of all types of minority groups. You're unqualified and you get this job. And sometimes that does happen, but most of the time it's not someone who's unqualified. It's oftentimes someone who has a comparable or slightly below comparable qualifications. They may get bumped up. But interestingly, through nepotism, through connections, through networking, we see affirmative action has always taken place. But we may not necessarily consider it affirmative action. But if you have a family member who owns a business and you get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to that job, it doesn't mean you're not qualified to work that job. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that part of the reason you got that job was because you had a family member who was doing the hiring. And so affirmative action doesn't simply mean that you get something without merit, but it often does mean that the merit may not always be viewed as equal. Far as it wasn't just your GPA, it wasn't just your hard work. Some of the merit was also the fact that your last name was the same last name as this person over here who did the hiring. And it doesn't mean that you're not qualified for the job, but it does mean that some of what you got was due to nepotism, favoritism, affirmative action. And so I think it's important that we recognize that that has taken place from the beginning. We see it even throughout the Bible. There were certain things that God chosen people received that was not based on merit, that they did not deserve. And oftentimes we would see them drop the ball in so many ways, but were still blessed. Not because of who they were, but because of who they knew, God. And this isn't a conversation about whether it's right or wrong. It's a conversation about the reality of that. And how do we address those realities that say, if I own a business, shouldn't I be allowed to hire my family and hire the people I want? Yeah, sure. But then let's not pretend that we're trying to be as diverse as possible. Because if we're truly valuing diversity, we're not just valuing those who look differently, but also those who think differently, those who may give us some dissenting views. All those things are valuable when it comes to companies, because you don't want just a whole bunch of people who always say yes. You don't want a whole bunch of people who only do one thing. You don't want a whole bunch of people who always who are just like everyone else. Part of the beauty and richness is we want different people who bring something different to the table. So I think about in that Corinthians passage in chapter 12, many parts to one body. We can't have a whole bunch of eyes, a whole bunch of noses. We need some feet, we need arms, we need all those other body parts too. And I think organizations would be better off if they had diversity at every level also. All right, so this has been a 20-minute video. I knew this was going to be a little bit longer because you got some great stuff out there. I want to encourage you all to finish up strong. We got a couple more forums left. I've noticed that the interviews have started coming in. I'm grading stuff in sections, and so right now I'm finishing up some papers from a different class. And then between Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, Saturday, I'll be grading papers from a second class. And then my hope is to get to your paper starting on Saturday night, your interviews, and I'll probably take a week or so to knock those out, definitely before the semester's over. That's the last major assignment. So what you're doing for those who've completed those papers, I just want you to finish up strong as far as the forum discussions and making sure you're doing your initial posts as well as posting those 2 responses to your classmates. For those who've not turned in your paper, continue to work on those. I think I officially said those are due Friday. And so I look forward to reading those interviews. I know I really enjoy when the students interview people from different cultures. I learn a lot myself. Anyway, be blessed. Hope you had a blessed holiday. Let's finish up strong. Take care. God bless.